Hello friends, and welcome to our final 4 lessons inside of the Photoshop Basics for Scrapbooking class. Now these next 4 lessons are not necessarily totally all about Photoshop. I wanted to include a little bit in here about using Silhouette as well, and how you can combine Photoshop and Silhouette to help you create your very own cut files. Now what is Silhouette? Silhouette is a cutting machine that allows you to send a file to the machine and have the machine cut out a design for you. It saves a ton of time in terms of cutting things out, and it can help you create some really interesting, intricate kinds of scrapbooking pages. So today I am going to show you the basics of the Silhouette Studio software. Now this is available for free online, and I'll show you where you can find it, whether or not you have a Silhouette to actually send the files to. Now, of course, there's a lot more benefit if you own the machine, because then you can actually cut the file out. But let's say you don't have the machine and a friend does, or you're creating a cut file for someone else to use. The program is still available for you to download and work with if that's something that you are interested in doing. Now, unfortunately, I don't own a Cricut cutting machine, so I'm not going to be talking about that machine in this lesson, but I do believe that a lot of the concepts and the ideas that I will be teaching you can relate to the Cricut as well. So hopefully you'll be able to get something out of this if you are a Cricut user rather than a Silhouette user. So today we're going to begin by going over to the computer, and I'm just going to show you the dashboard and go over the different tools that you can use inside of the Silhouette software. Then we're going to talk next week about how to cut files out and the settings that I prefer to use. Then we're going to talk about creating our own cut files. And then in our final lesson, we're going to cover the print and cut functions that Silhouette has. So let's head over to the computer and go over the main page that you're going to see when Silhouette opens up, and talk about the different tools that the program has for us to use. Welcome friends to my desktop once again, and to our final topic inside of our Photoshop/Photoshop Elements class. This month we are going to be talking about Silhouette and how Silhouette can integrate with Photoshop or Photoshop Elements to help you create your very own customized cut files. But before we get into the integrations between the two systems or the two programs, first I want to spend our lesson today talking about Silhouette and giving you a brief introduction to the Silhouette software program. The Silhouette software is called Silhouette Studio, and it is available as a free download on the internet. If you go to Google and search for Silhouette Studio, you will find the link that will take you to this page right here. It's the silhouetteamerica.com/software. From here, you can go ahead and download the program to your computer. Now, you won't be able to cut the files unless you actually have a Silhouette to send the files to. But even if you don't have a Silhouette, you can still use this program to create cut files for other people to use or anything like that. For most people who don't have the Silhouette, there's not going to be a big reason for you to get this program. If you do have the Silhouette though, then this lesson is going to be beneficial for you if you've never used the program before. So let's jump back over to our Silhouette Studio main screen here. When you start up the program, you're going to automatically get one of these 13 by 13 pages or grid pages directly in the middle of the screen. This is the cutting mat that you would put into the machine to cut out your cut file. Currently, you can see that my file has the rasterization marks on it and crop marks on it, which lets me know that if I add my element into the middle area, where this in the middle of this red outline, it's going to cut it at the correct dimensions. Now for myself, I actually go ahead and take these off and I utilize the entire mat. This section is the 12 by 12, but the full mat is actually 13 by 13. In order to do that, we're going to change some settings over in the right-hand panel here. But before we get there, let me just talk about the different toolbars that you see here on the screen. Up at the top, you have your normal file and edit, which allows you to copy and paste different elements. You can also hover over the view panel in order to zoom, rotate, show the grid marks, show the border marks, and this is what I'm actually going to take off of my page here. We can do that right now. So actually I want to keep the grid, but I want to take away the border because I don't necessarily care about that. And then, you know what, we'll come back to this in a minute. Registration marks. Did I call it restoration marks? I meant to say registration marks. So the view panel. Underneath the panel here, there are a bunch of different settings that I will be honest, I don't know a whole lot about. So you've got the page setup, pick scan, fill color, line style, select by color, trace, and lots of other things. I believe that these are going to be more if you were actually drawing your cut file inside of this program. I use Photoshop Creative Cloud or Photoshop Elements to create my elements first, and then I bring them into Silhouette and turn them into cut files. I have pretty much never created a cut file within the Silhouette program singularly. It's always a PNG from my Photoshop Creative Cloud program, which we'll get into that a little bit later this month. The next panel over is Object. Now the Object panel you're going to use, or I use it quite often in order to change the settings on an object that's sitting on my cut file. So an object could mean the PNG that you pull in or a cut file that you pull in. It's a file that's sitting on top of your mat. When you come into the object panel, you're going to be able to mirror it so you can change the direction of the cut file. And that's really awesome if you're going to back a cut file on the front and the back. If you can create a mirror cut of the same thing, then it's going to let you create a really nice finish on the back. There's an arrange that allows you to change which layer is on top of your mat. You can align to help you align your elements where you want them to go. So if you've got two pieces that are supposed to be cut out together, when you align them, it's going to bring them so they're both centered together. You can rotate your elements, replicate your elements, and modify your elements by wielding or cropping and all of that fun stuff. Oftentimes, the elements that we create, the cut files that we create, are made up of a bunch of tiny little cuts. Those cuts are all grouped together to create one file. However, sometimes you might want to take one of those cuts out. It might be unnecessary. In that case, you will come into this object panel here and use the ungroup function, which then makes each of those tiny little cuts its own thing, and you can go in there and delete them out if you want to. We will work with this a little bit later so you can see what that looks like. And then we also have this convert to path, release compound path, and make compound path, which is very similar to the group ungroup. It'll look a lot the same, but it's going to basically do the same thing. It's going to break apart your cut file if you release the compound path, and then when you remake the compound path or convert it to a path, then it's going to make that into a single cutting file. And then of course there's the help menu, which is similar to most other help menus in other programs as well. Underneath that, we have the new drawing, open, save, print. There's the copy, paste, undo, redo. There are some color selections here, your zoom tools, and your move tools. Under that, you're going to see some menu items. So based on the tool that you have, this menu under here is going to change, just like it does in the Photoshop programming. When you select a tool, you get a menu that allows you to make adjustments to whatever that tool is doing. On the left-hand side, we have our move tool. We've got a couple of different like endpoint and line tools. These are, and shape tools, which are primarily for making new cut files within this program. We've got the pencil tool, an alphabet or text tool, This one is a note to make a note about something on your cut file. So if you're making a cut file and you wanted to notify whoever is using it that there's something they need to do, you could draw a note on there, and the note is not going to be something that would be cut out. There's an eraser tool, and then there's also the knife tool for helping to make those cuts. On the right hand side, we have another toolbar, and this is the one that you're going to see me using the most. So over here, we have our page setup. So this is the first thing that's usually open when you create a new file. On here, you can click on this first section in order to determine what your machine is, what your cutting mat is, how much of a reveal you have. I set mine down to 0%. The height and width of your media size, the orientation, whether you need to rotate it. This allows you to print with a border around whatever it is, or show the print border for whatever it is you are creating. This one shows the cut border, which we took that off a little bit earlier, and then the print bleed. So if you are printing and cutting, you might want the print bleed on, but I keep mine off. So generally my settings look just like this. On the next section here, where it looks like a grid, you can have your grid on or off. I prefer to have mine on so I know the measurements of where everything is hitting. You can also do a snap to grid, which is going to make your elements snap to the grid lines rather than putting them on there freehand. There's some spacing and divisions on here and some color settings. I pretty much only work with the show grid or don't show grid, but I typically keep my grid on, so I'm not changing a whole lot in here. The last one is the registration marks. For this one, you can have them turned on or off. I prefer for mine to be off, so I'm working with a blank screen that has the grid background. If you turn them on, you're able to determine where your registration marks are located by changing the length and thickness in the inset. You can have them be default or invert them, whatever you're most comfortable working with. For me, this is what I am most comfortable working with, a blank screen with nothing else on it except for my grid. We'll go ahead and put that away. Next, we've got the PIX, the pick scan. I don't ever use this, and I don't even really know what it does. If I had to guess, I would say that it probably scans an image and then creates a cut based on the scan. Next here is the fill colors. Again, I don't really use this one. The line styles, I don't really use this one. But this tool right here, the trace tool that looks like a butterfly, is my #1 most used tool inside of this program. The trace tool allows you to trace over an element on your page, which typically I'm bringing in a PNG style element. You can trace around it and create a cut file based on the image in the cutting mat area. So you've got your select trace area, which you can click on and then drag a box over wherever it is you want to create your cut file. Then you can set your threshold, which is going to be, how intricately do you want it to match up to your file you're trying to cut, or do you want it to just get the general shape of your element? And again, we will look at this a little bit later so you can see more what that means. This allows you to trace both the outer and inner edges. This is the outer edge only, and this is a trace and detach. So you're going to keep the background and the element that you traced. I'm usually going to use this top trace tool that says trace the outer and the inner, or I will sometimes use this trace outer edge, especially if we're working with print and cut for something like ephemera. A lot of these other tools are ones I just don't really use. We've got image effects, we've got text style for if you're going to add some words on here. This is great if you're trying to make your own title. You can find some fonts that you really like and then type out a word, decide how big or little you want it to be, and use that to create a cut file for your page. We've got some transform tools allowing you to adjust where the alignment of your different pieces is. The replicate tool, the modify tool. So a lot of these are the same as what we would have found up in this object panel. This one here is an offset, which is really awesome if you want to cut your file slightly larger than it really is. Maybe you're doing print and cut, you're making a tag, and you want a little bit of white around the outside of the tag. You can use the offset button to adjust your cut line slightly out from where the element is, giving you that white border. The pop-up and stipple and emboss and line effects, I can say that I have never used any of those and I don't really know what they do. For our class today, we're just really talking about, or this month, we're really just talking about the basics of how to use this program in order to cut files that are already in existence and how we can use PNGs to create cut files for our needs without having to actually design the entire cut file ourselves. The Silhouette store here is where you can go to purchase the cut files that they have inside of their own store. The library is where you are going to have where you can store some of the cut files that you have downloaded. So like here's a bunch of them that I have downloaded in the past. That's my library. And then the send button is what you're going to use to send your cut file to your Silhouette in order to cut it. There are tools here at the top that allows you to pick what kind of material you are cutting out of, the blade that you want to use, and the type of cut. So for example, for most of the cardstock that I am cutting here at home, I typically use this textured heavy 80-pound cardstock material because it means my blade is going to press in a little bit harder into the material to cut the element out, because 80 pounds is a whole lot more than some of the thinner papers that you might use. However, the Silhouette doesn't always do the best job of cutting out my regular cardstock. So I like to use this heavy 80-pound material so that it presses through and actually gets it to cut out nicely. There are other types of papers in here though. So if you're using linen fabric or wool fabric or craft foam, there's this cover stock heavy, which is 105 to 122 pounds. That's going to press in even harder. There's regular copy paper, chipboard, glitter cardstock, chalkboard cardstock, acrylic felt, printable foil, like so many different types of materials that you can use to cut with your Silhouette. The next one where it says action, you can have this cut it, score it, or sketch it. The sketch allows you to add in a pencil into a pencil holder, and it will then sketch the design onto your page for you, which is so awesome. You can also use markers to have it draw with a marker or a pen to draw with a pen, so you can turn it into a coloring page of sorts. Scoring is just going to lightly press into it so that when it is done, all you have to do is lightly fold on those edges in order to get a crisp fold. And then the cut tool or the cut action is self-explanatory. It is to cut it out. There are a couple of different blades that you can use as well. A ratchet blade, which I know is favored by a lot of people who use Silhouettes. The deep cut blade that allows it to go deeper into the material, and the auto blade where it auto adjusts based on the material that you're using. I do not own the ratchet blade. I only own an auto blade, so that's what I'm using for all of my cuts. Then down in the textured heavy 80-pound settings here, which this changes based on what you're using. So if I were to go back to just cardstock plain, then my settings are going to change versus cardstock textured heavy. The things that are changing on here are the force, so how hard it presses into the mat, the speed at which it cuts, so that's how fast it's going to actually cut along those lines. And then we also have a menu item for number of passes. So that's how many times is the silhouette going to cut along each of the lines that it needs to go through. I generally keep mine at these settings right here. So force of 30, a speed of 4, and a pass of 1. If I am unsure if my silhouette is going to cut through my file nicely, especially if I'm working with really intricate pieces, I may up my number of passes to 2 instead of 1. But I generally keep my force and the speed the same for all of my cut files. All right, friends, that is a brief outline of the Silhouette Design Studio. Next week, we're going to come back again, and I'm going to show you how to cut out a pre-existing cut file. So we'll pull in a cut file, we'll take a look at what it looks like, and I'll show you how to print it. I also will show you how you can break apart the pre-made cut file and make adjustments to it if there are parts of the cut file you don't necessarily want to be cut out. So I'll show you those things next week. In the meantime, I would love for you, if you own this program, to jump into the Silhouette program or the Silhouette Studio and toggle around to those different tools just to get an idea for what they all are. But pay specific attention to your trace tool and then also to the send settings, the settings that we're looking at right here. I want you to keep an eye on those as well. Until next time, friends, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you back here for the next lesson.